Turning point at 45. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'll never forget my 45th birthday. It wasn't marked by cake or laughter, but by a realization that flipped my world upside down. Living in Nashville, Tennessee, I'd spent over 2 decades as a stay-at-home mom, orchestrating family dinners and school projects, thinking my life's soundtrack would always be the noise of my children and the gentle hum of my husband, Daniel. Little did I know, everything I believed was about to unravel. 45 was supposed to feel like a gentle turning of a page, not a tornado tearing through what I thought was solid ground. I woke up that February morning, feeling both hopeful and hesitant. Our youngest daughter was off to college soon, and I imagined a new chapter for myself. Maybe taking piano lessons, exploring the city's growing food scene, or finally starting the small art business I dreamed about in secret. I craved change, but the change I got was brutal and uncompromising. It started innocently enough. An unfamiliar scent on Daniel's shirt, strange absences, his phone kept closer than ever. And yet, as women often do, I told myself stories to soothe the anxiety. He was stressed at work, just distracted, maybe even planning a surprise, since I'd hinted plenty about a trip to Asheville. The denial was my shield against the dread pressing at my chest. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. Oddly timed business meetings, the way our old friends, especially Lisa, a neighbor I once considered a sister, had grown distant. I ignored these tremors, desperate to believe in the life I'd worked so tirelessly to build. But on the very night of my birthday, while cleaning up after a quiet dinner, a message flashed on Daniel's phone. I didn't want to look, but something in me, the same intuition that guided me through motherhood, told me I needed to know. That message ignited the storm. My body went cold as I read words no wife should ever have to see. Suddenly, 45 wasn't about reinvention or freedom. It was about picking up the broken pieces of everything I thought I knew. At first, I was paralyzed. There's a unique pain reserved for betrayal by those you trust most. A pain that makes you question your past, your choices, even your worth. But as the shock faded, I found a fierce clarity. The roles I'd played, doting wife, devoted friend, selfless mother, had kept me in the background for too long. Now, as I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, I promised myself something. My story wouldn't end as a victim. This turning point, as devastating as it was, would become my reckoning and, ultimately, my rebirth. The shattering moment. The real breaking point didn't come with one dramatic confrontation like the movies. It crept in slowly, poisoning ordinary days until the truth could no longer be ignored. I remember one evening in particular. The house was quiet, except for the low hum of the dishwasher. Daniel claimed he'd be late because of a big project deadline. My daughters had texted to say they'd be staying out late with friends. The sense of emptiness in the house matched the emptiness inside my chest. I couldn't help but sense I was only a spectator in my own home. I wandered through the rooms, touching family photos, our wedding picture, the girls' graduation snapshots. I used to cling to those images as proof of happiness. But that night, every smile in those photos looked like a secret I hadn't been let in on. My thoughts kept circling back to Lisa. What excuse did she give me this time? I realized she hadn't been over in weeks, not since she and Daniel started exchanging those innocent, but not so innocent glances at neighborhood barbecues. As the clock crept toward midnight, I stared at my phone, fighting the urge to snoop. I told myself I was above that, but doubt is a stubborn enemy. Eventually, curiosity and dread won out. I tried to access Daniel's text messages. The passcode was changed. My stomach dropped. That simple act, a different set of numbers, spoke volumes. I gathered my strength and called Lisa. She didn't pick up, but sent a text instantly. Hey, can I call you later? Super busy tonight. The lie hung in the air. Too casual. Too rehearsed. That was the moment the heartbreak became physical. My hands trembled, my heart pounding so loud, I thought it would shatter my ribs. In that split second, I knew everything had changed. There was no more hiding from the truth or massaging reality with hopeful what-ifs. I sank to the kitchen floor, clutching a dish towel like it was a lifeline, sobbing as quietly as I could so the neighbors wouldn't hear. I grieved not just for my marriage, but for the version of myself I had been. The woman so eager to believe in everyone else's goodness that she missed the bad right under her nose. In the days that followed, I went through the motions, making beds, doing laundry, preparing meals. But on the inside, I was falling apart. The betrayal unraveling inside me was not a singular moment, but a series of tiny fractures. Every look, every excuse, every phone call that ended too fast. Each one chiseling away at my defenses until, finally, I shattered entirely. That was the true shattering moment. And it was not as cinematic as I had imagined. It was simply gutting and infinitely lonely. Rebuilding my life from the rubble.
Take your time.
The months after the divorce felt like learning to navigate a new city blindfolded. Every step uncertain, every turn full of doubt. I'd spent so long tolerating small betrayals, excusing the lowering of my standards, that I struggled to distinguish heartbreak from habit. The silence of an empty house became oppressive after years of lively family meals and back-and-forth banter with teenage daughters. Loneliness was my new shadow, and it followed me everywhere, whispering that I would never have love, trust, or joy ever again. But in the quiet, I finally started to hear my own voice, one I'd muffled for far too long. It started with small decisions. I repainted the living room walls, choosing a warm, golden ochre instead of Daniel's favorite sage green. I donated boxes of his old books and those wine glasses we'd been saving for anniversaries that wouldn't come. The act of letting go, both physically and emotionally, released something heavy from inside me. For each memory I surrendered, a little bit of light crept in, but freedom did not taste sweet right away. Sleepless nights haunted me, filled with second-guessing and regret. Was I to blame for the distance that grew, inch by inch, until it was a canyon we couldn't cross? Some mornings, getting out of bed felt like pushing a boulder up a mountain. I distracted myself with mindless chores, but even the rhythm of folding laundry, always Daniel's dress shirts, and Lisa's casual cardigans burned in my mind, became a meditation on loss. A turning point came the day I joined a community pottery class. My hands, which had been busy serving others for decades, learned to mold misshapen lumps of clay into something new, imperfect, but proudly mine. Each bowl I made was the opposite of my marriage, uneven, but whole, rough around the edges, but honest. The workshop's teacher, a spry woman named Patty in her 70s, adored imperfections. Honey, she would say, it's the cracks that let the light dance through. Making new friends was awkward at first. I felt like a fraud, the divorcee, who didn't quite fit in with the soccer moms or the retirees. But slowly, I realized I wasn't alone in my pain or my longing for connection. I built a support network out of women with their own stories. Carrie, who left an unfaithful husband last winter. Gloria, widowed, but fiercely independent. Mia, reinventing herself after becoming an empty nester. We laughed over wine, cried over heartbreak, and stitched together our broken bits over mugs of too strong coffee. Of course, practical matters screamed for attention. I had to find a job for the first time in over 20 years. My resume was anemic, boasting volunteer work in a PTA presidency that meant little on paper, but gave me the grit to learn quickly. I started at a craft bakery, working morning shifts, dusting croissants with powdered sugar at dawn. The routine gave me structure. The customers gave me warmth, and the occasional free pastry gave me hope. For the first time, I took pride in something outside my former roles as wife and mother. Maybe the most difficult part was facing my own reflection each morning. The face staring back at me was tired, but there was a spark coming alive. I began journaling, scribbling out thoughts I used to suppress, tackling insecurities with a pen as my sword. I wrote letters to Daniel, which I never sent, to Lisa, which I burned in the kitchen sink, and to my daughters, sharing lessons learned, truths discovered, and the unfailing power of self-forgiveness. Forgiving myself was not easy. I wrestled for months with the guilt of somehow failing at marriage, and I still flinched at the sight of couples holding hands in the grocery store. But eventually, I realized forgiveness did not mean excusing the betrayal. It meant giving myself permission to move on. With every small victory, getting a raise at work, finishing my first clay vase, hosting a Thanksgiving dinner solo, I reclaimed pieces of myself thought lost forever. I won't lie, rebuilding life from rubble is not glamorous, and some nights still ache with nostalgia and anger. But as the seasons turned, so too did my grief. I planted a garden in the backyard, determined to bring beauty where sorrow once grew. Tomatoes and daisies flourished alongside new dreams. Each time I harvested something I'd nurtured alone, I smiled because I was finally living for myself, by myself, with open arms for what would come next. The web of lies. What I didn't expect after the official end of my marriage was just how deep the deception ran, and how many people had been complicit in the lie I'd been living. You'd think that after divorce papers are signed, the worst is behind you. But for me, the aftermath was a slow unraveling of truth that left me alternately furious and heartbroken, and then, strangely enough, empowered. At first, there were just whispers, side comments from acquaintances, awkward silences when I entered a room. The lingering feeling there were stories everyone knew but me. It started with an anonymous email sent late at night to my new work address. The subject was simply, "You deserved better." Part of me thought it was a cruel joke, but curiosity got the better of me. The message inside wasn't graphic or cruel. In fact, it read as if written by a fellow traveler on the road of betrayal. "Emily, I saw what happened at last year's holiday party. You needed to know. You weren't crazy." That kicked open a door I'd barely allowed myself to admit existed. I began to notice patterns. Mutual friends who'd stopped inviting me to their dinners, a neighbor's sympathetic glance paired with a hasty retreat. I even overheard two parents at a school event quietly discussing how hard it must be for Emily. When I finally built up the courage to ask Carol, the flower shop owner, I wasn't even sure what I'd hear. Carol hesitated, then quietly shared that she'd seen Mark and Angie together often, far beyond what friendship would explain. Even before my suspicions began, it felt like my once quiet, safe community had been hiding a different reality behind every front door. I pieced together timelines, the so-called business trips, Angie's increasing distance, affection replaced with forced smiles. The realization struck. The affair wasn't just a lapse in judgment. It was years in the making, woven through playdates, cookouts, carpools, Angie, my best friend since high school, was just as tangled in the deception as Mark. It shook me to my core. It was betrayal squared, not just romantic, but the loss of the person I shared every secret and triumph with. I wasn't just grieving the man I married. I was mourning the sisterhood I thought I had with Angie. And then came the confessions. People emboldened by my honesty began reaching out, in person and online, sharing little bits of what they'd witnessed. Mark flirting at company events, Angie making excuses to leave work early. There was an odd relief in knowing I hadn't misread the signs all those years, but a deeper sadness that so many had known and kept silent. I understood then that the first heartbreak was personal. What came after was communal, a loss of innocence about the society I trusted. Yet this, too, shifted my story. I stopped feeling like an outsider in my own life. Instead, with each revelation, I reclaimed my power. I wasn't naive or foolish. I had simply chosen to believe in the best of the people around me, a choice I refused to let regret poison. The web of lies, once exposed, gave me freedom. I no longer had to clutch to the fantasy of my marriage or my friendship. The truth, painful as it was, made way for new beginnings, with people who understood that honesty matters. In the end, the deeper the lies, the greater my resolve to build something authentic, both with others and within myself. The start of my revenge plan. Looking back now, I'm almost surprised by the calm with which I began plotting my revenge. It wasn't a heated rush of anger that pushed me. It was a quiet, simmering sense of justice, a clarity that comes from having survived devastation and realizing that the only one left to protect me was me. The seeds of my plan were planted in the aftermath of yet another sleepless night, a cup of cold coffee pressing against my palm. As I stared into the kitchen's darkness, I'd always considered myself forgiving by nature. But this betrayal wasn't something I could simply swallow. The depth of Mark and Angie's deceit, years spent building a private world behind my back, demanded something besides tears and whispered confessions in journals. I started methodically, almost businesslike, by collecting evidence, not out of spite, but out of a desire to ensure no one could doubt the reality I'd lived. Emails, credit card statements, hidden photographs tucked deep in Mark's old laptop. Each discovery stung, but each also made me feel a little more in control. Documenting the truth was empowering. It transformed the pain of what had happened into a blueprint for what I would do next. Next, I made a conscious decision not to confront Mark or Angie right away. I realized early that rage would be a gift to them, the kind of closure that always puts the wronged party back in their place. Instead, I practiced politeness at school drop-offs and the grocery store. I shared nothing of my suspicions with our daughters, waiting until I had the full, undeniable picture. My patience wasn't silence, it was strategy. When the moment came to reveal what I'd gathered, I didn't do it in public, but at our lawyer's office. Mark's face turned ashen as I calmly laid out the timeline. Printouts and photographs fanned before him. Angie refused to meet my eyes, twisting her wedding band as if she could simply rewind their private theater of lies. They both tried to deny, but the evidence was watertight. The lawyer, impartial, simply nodded and said, "I think we should proceed." But my revenge wasn't only about legal battles. I knew my real power lay in the delicate web of community connections I'd nurtured for decades. Quietly, I let trusted friends know the truth, not in a bid for drama, but to reclaim my own narrative. The effect was a slow but steady isolation of Mark and Angie from the social circles they'd counted on. Invitations dwindled. Whispers started to follow them instead of me. For years, Angie had hosted the town's spring brunch. That year, I did instead. And for the first time in forever, I felt not like an outcast, but like someone taking back the keys to her own world. I didn't go out of my way to ruin their reputations, but I didn't protect them any longer. When business acquaintances asked about Mark's sudden instability at work, the missed deadlines, the tension, I simply said, "I'm sure people make their own choices." The truth, now set loose, did its own work. There was a power in precision. I refused to let this become an ugly shouting match. Instead, I made small, yet impactful decisions, ensuring the truth got wherever it needed to go. Quietly arranging for Mark to handle the financial fallout of his choices. Even reaching out to Angie's husband with empathy but firmness, so he too could choose his next steps fully informed. For years, I had overlooked my own intuition for the sake of peace. Now, I honored it fiercely. It was not about spite, but about finally putting myself first. Perhaps the most satisfying aspect of my plan was rediscovering my self-respect. Each step away from secrecy and shame made me stand taller. I started dressing in ways that made me feel bold. I treated myself, just once, to an expensive bottle of wine, poured myself a glass, and toasted the woman who rose from the ashes, not by accident, but by sheer will. Through it all, I insulated our daughters from drama as best I could. I didn't want them weaponized by bitterness or confusion. When the questions came, as they inevitably did, I spoke to them honestly, emphasizing that their father's actions reflected on him, not them, and that we each have the right and power to demand truth in our lives. And so my revenge, as much as it may seem calculated from the outside, was actually the art of living well, living without secrets, without fear, and without settling for less than I deserved. Watching Mark and Angie realize that the world would not quietly excuse their choices, seeing the subtle shifts in how people regarded me, not with pity, but with something closer to respect, taught me that the best vengeance rarely requires cruelty. Justice, when paired with dignity, is its own reward, the betrayer's price. If you'd asked me years ago, I might have said that cheaters always walk away unscathed. But living through betrayal changed that. Only when the dust of heartbreak settled could I witness what truly happens on the other side. What happens to those who betray not just their vows, but someone who trusted them with every corner of their heart. Michael and Linda, once so sure of their secret world, soon discovered the real cost of their choices. It didn't begin with fireworks or a dramatic public unveiling. The price they paid unfolded quietly, in increments, the universe chipping away at their security bit by bit. After I presented the truth, calmly, methodically, and without the tears they might have expected, Michael's world began to erode. His closest friends, the ones who gathered for football and beers every Sunday, drifted away.
Michael?
When they overheard whispers about what had happened, when my quiet dignity made the rounds and his deception became the talk of our circles, it was as if Michael carried a silent brand imprint of disgrace. At work, it was subtle at first. Fewer invitations to after-hours cocktails, vague responses in meetings, the odd look from a coworker that lingered a moment too long. The company he'd built his identity around valued integrity, family, transparency, words that suddenly pressed down on him like weights. When the rumors reached the higher-ups, Michael tried to deny, but evidence has a way of rooting itself deep. The smile he wore grew tighter, the phone calls from colleagues less frequent. Eventually, his role diminished. He was left performing tasks far beneath his capabilities, while junior staff offered polite but unmistakably wary glances. Linda didn't escape unscathed either. Her family, who'd always prided themselves on unity, was devastated, not so much by the affair itself, but by the yawning crack of dishonesty it left in her wake. Her sisters, once eager to swap recipes and weekend plans, stopped inviting her. Family gatherings turned awkward. There was always an empty seat at the end of the table, and she felt it. Neighbors, those who previously waved with warmth, grew cool. Her social calendar, which was once so full it required color coding, became an almost empty page. Even her beloved book club, the one place she sought escape, was never quite the same. Where there was laughter and easy camaraderie, now there were uncomfortable silences and the sensation of being watched. I wish I could say the hurt they experienced made me feel vindicated, but mostly it made me reflect. The universe has a way of balancing scales in slow, somber ways. As Michael and Linda tried to stitch together a new public life, they found their reputations pre-frayed, the fabric of their integrity thin. They wanted to move forward, present themselves as a legitimate couple, as if what had begun in secrecy could easily continue in the light. But the thing about a relationship founded on betrayal is that it's always missing a core ingredient: trust. I heard about the fights from mutual friends, discreetly at first, and later, more openly. Michael and Linda squabbled not just over daily annoyances, but over ghosts, over who reached out to whom first, who lied best, who was more to blame for my heartbreak and the shattering of two families. Jealousy seemed to take root in place of affection. There's no soil more fertile for suspicion than the terrain where cheating has already occurred. They could not enjoy the simple pleasure of intimacy without remembering the lies it was built upon. Every phone beep, every late night at the office meant a new worry, a new argument, and possibly a replay of old wounds. Financially, they weren't spared either. Michael had to deal with the fallout of our divorce settlement, the loss of shared assets, the reality of two households where there had once been one. Linda's husband, the man she'd betrayed alongside me, chose to protect his own heart, taking the children with him and insisting on clear boundaries. The courtrooms carved out their own kind of justice, impersonal and indifferent, but devastatingly real. Suddenly, Michael and Linda's vision of a fresh start looked a lot like struggle, a smaller apartment, less travel, and the shadow of past mistakes looming over every discussion about the future. Their attempts to socialize, to re-enter old circles under the guise of being happy together now, fell flat. Friends on both sides remained cautious, anxious not to get caught in a fresh round of lies, or simply reluctant to play the audience to a drama that was all too public. Invitations dwindled. The spaces that once belonged to both of them, barbecues, lake trips, annual friends, Thanksgiving, became my territory by quiet, mutual consent. People seemed to understand I wasn't seeking vengeance. I was just picking up my life, determined to do it honestly and without bitterness. Slowly, the community circled around me. A subtle shift that left Michael and Linda watching from the sidelines. But perhaps the greatest cost wasn't public shame or practical hardships. It was the private toll. I remember hearing from one of Linda's cousins who found her crying in her car after a particularly chilly church service, abandoned by the women she once called sisters. Or Michael, seen alone at the coffee shop, scrolling through his phone as if searching for a message of forgiveness or redemption that wouldn't come. Whatever their future held, it would never quite escape the long shadow of their choice. It all taught me something crucial. Forgiveness isn't something I owed my betrayers, and retribution didn't need to be my goal. Time is the fairest judge of all. Watching Michael and Linda bear the consequences of their actions, I found something better than revenge. I found perspective and, slowly, peace. The world spun on. Seasons changed. Their suffering, subtle and relentless, was never for my entertainment, but it was real. So if you ever wonder what happens to those who betray, let my story illuminate the answer. They inherit a life woven with the threads of their own choices, sometimes unraveling, sometimes just frayed, but forever marked by the fallout they set in motion. And as for me, I finally understood that closure isn't given, but claimed, with strength, dignity, and eyes set firmly on a future that belongs to no one else but me. Rediscovering myself in the land of freedom. If you had told me years ago that I would remake my entire life in a foreign country, I would have laughed and dismissed the idea as a midlife daydream. Yet here I am, standing on my own 2 feet in America. Each breath, both a reminder of the ache I left behind and the freedom pulsing beneath my skin. Anyone who thinks independence is simply a state of being has never had to build it. From the ashes of betrayal, the first days felt hollow in a way I can hardly put into words. My new apartment, a 3rd-floor walk-up above a flower shop, echoed with unfamiliar silence. Even so, when sunlight poured through the window in the early mornings, I let myself notice small things. The scent of fresh bread from the bakery downstairs, the hum of city buses, the fluttering voice of a neighbor singing as she watered her plants. These tiny details grounded me, reminding me that life went on, even when mine felt paused between grief and hope. I started by establishing rituals, clinging to structure when everything else seemed uprooted. Every evening, I would sit at my tiny kitchen table and journal, not out of habit, but necessity. My words spilled across the page in tangled rivers, fears, dreams, memories, and mundane lists. Things to buy, laundry to do, people to forgive. The act of writing reminded me I still had a voice. For so long, I'd filtered my every thought through the lens of wife, mother, peacemaker. Now, I let my thoughts roam, unedited, sometimes penning wild, ambitious plans for my future. Some nights, I'd make myself laugh, picturing my daughter's shock if they read the wild fantasies I confided to a cheap spiral notebook. Finding a job was less an adventure and more a jolt of reality. My resume was thin. Years of unpaid labor and emotional caretaking disguised as domestic experience. I applied everywhere. Cafes, bookstores, grocery stores, willing to learn, desperate to earn my own way. The bakery downstairs offered the first chance. The owner, a French woman named Claudine, hired me to help with morning prep at 5 a.m. I fumbled with flour and dough, but every batch taught me something about patience, precision, and the gentle satisfaction of watching bread rise under warm light. Financial control was new to me, and sometimes terrifying. I learned to budget down to the last dollar, to compare prices and hunt for bargains, to resist impulse spending, even when I craved small luxuries to ease the loneliness. Yet, with every bill paid on time, with each week's groceries planned and accounted for, I felt my confidence growing, solid and practical as a good loaf of bread. What surprised me most was how quickly I began to collect new bits of identity, a patchwork quilt built from all the small things I dared to try. A pottery class, found on a community center flyer, became an exercise in letting go of perfectionism. My earliest attempts at bowls wobbled, but I liked the way the clay felt beneath my fingers, how mistakes could be reshaped instead of discarded. Patty, the teacher, said, "In this country, honey, you get as many chances as you need. There's no shame in being a beginner. Through the bakery and classes, I made friends, not out of obligation, but choice. Gloria, another recent divorcee, lived one floor below and became my confidant over cheap wine and takeout. Samira, a Syrian refugee and single mother, swapped recipes with me. We laughed, shared stories, and built our own hodgepodge community, each of us a survivor of sorts. Our backgrounds were different, but our hunger for belonging was the same. We joked about our tribe, but in truth, they became family, a chosen family that held space for both celebration and sorrow. Little by little, I found myself embracing American customs, Thanksgiving potlucks, local street fairs, lazy Sundays in the park, fireworks on the 4th of July. No one cared that my accent slipped in and out, that sometimes I mixed metaphors or needed help understanding a joke. In fact, my difference seemed to be treasured, something to bring to the table instead of something to hide. For perhaps the first time, I experienced what it's like to be celebrated for vulnerability, for showing up, battered and hopeful, to start again. With independence came self-reflection. I realized that so much of my earlier life had been about seeking validation from a husband, from children, from a community that wasn't truly mine. Now, every little achievement felt monumental because I did it for me. Fixing the leaky faucet, standing up for myself when a customer got rude, asking for a raise and actually getting it, hosting my first holiday meal where laughter roared and no one tiptoed around old wounds. But the transformation wasn't easy, and some evenings, grief still crept in, unexpected and sharp. Anniversaries passed. My daughter's milestones brought bittersweet pride. Laughter shared over video calls, marking distances that words couldn't quite cross. Yet, even in missing them, I honored the woman I'd become, someone who could long for home, but build a new one with her own hands. Forgiveness was the final, hardest gift I gave myself. It wasn't about excusing betrayal or denying pain. It was a form of release. On the anniversary of my move, I baked a cake, inviting my new friends to celebrate. That night, as we toasted with sparkling cider, I stood in the center of my small living room, surrounded by laughter and untidy warmth, and realized I'd found a kind of freedom neither marriage nor revenge, nor even justice could deliver. It came from choosing to live deeply, authentically, and bravely, day after ordinary day. So this is what it looks like to find yourself in the land of freedom. Not a blaring anthem, but a quiet, stubborn belief that you can write your future, shape your story, and, one imperfect step at a time, become the hero you thought only existed in stories. I am no longer a supporting character in someone else's narrative. I am the author and protagonist of my own.